Hindi nyo napapasin yung oras. Malapit na pala tayo matapos. Okay? So, ito na lang, Father, for mga last few questions. This set of questions is about the RH bit. Okay? First, maybe Dr. RV can enlighten us also here. First question, saan ba nagsisimula talaga yung buhay? Kasi that's a focal point of the bill. One of the focal points in the discussion of the bill. Next, isang question dito, how can the church help control overpopulation? Help control overpopulation. So being an instrument or an institution in the society, what can the church do in overpopulation? And ito, what's happening between Ateneo and CPCP? I mean, about RH, are they having conflict? Okay, so ito yung mga magkakatingin na lang sa akin.
Let me start with the last one, because it's the easiest one. There's nothing. There's nothing going on between us. Only now. But that's, seriously, not that I'm privy to everything that happens, no? But I know what you see in the papers are not always accurate. The papers love to gustong gatungin ng hindi pagkakaunawaan. So, I want to say, it's not like Ateneo is a marked institution. If there are some bishops who feel that way, there are probably some. I don't think it's a majority. And I think because people recognize how complicated the issue is. So that's all. Now, second, where does that begin and what was the second one? Where does that begin and overpopulation. Okay, let's do overpopulation. The church's position on the problem of population is well, again, when you say church, madami. They have plenty of people. Actually, bishops are not exactly all saying perfectly the same thing. But we don't want, at least in my mind, a more balanced position is we don't want to ignore that people do have problems with huge families. Now, notice what I said, families. And that's, I think, the more helpful reference to not neglect, to not forget. Because when we talk about population, macro, but who actually makes decisions about population? Who? The couples. So don't forget that ultimately it boils down to the couples. So yes, macro level, there is problem, overpopulation, but where does overpopulation happen? It's actually localized in cities, and you know very well, the population problem is not simple. So, and people who talk about the population problem don't claim that controlling the population growth is going to solve the problem of poverty. They don't claim that. But again, just keep remembering, that's not the main goal. It's one of the steps. Now, what does the church do? Don't forget that officially, the church's teaching is couples have to be responsible when they raise their families, when they raise children. That's the teaching of the church. Some people who claim to represent the church say the church's position is go forth and multiply, as in Genesis 1. That is not accurate. That's not the teaching of the church. The teaching of the church is you have to be responsible. So ang pag-aaway is how can you be responsible? How can you limit your family size? So it's in the means, not so much in the fact that you do have to do it. Okay? Finally, when does life begin? Obviously, pag walang fertilization, you cannot even talk about life. But those of you who know, the process, you know very well, takes about 9 months. Mahaba talaga. And one important point in the development process is what you call implantation. So when the egg is fertilized by the sperm, so that's what the church believes is the beginning of human life. And all the scientists also agree that's the beginning of human life. Meaning without that, we cannot have the possibility of human life. But, ang pinagtatalunan, sometimes kasi that fertilized egg, and here biologists and medical doctors can add, that fertilized egg can sometimes still go through some splitting, nagiging dalawa. That's when you have identical twins. Or sometimes you have two fusing, kasi may mga nangyayari pa. And so some people say, philosophically, can you call that fertilized egg a human person? Notice the shift, no? From human life to human person. Kasi once you talk about human person, we're talking about a unique individual. Na wala nang katulad. Kahit naman twins, they're two unique individuals. So, sabi nila, now you recognize and you give human rights for human persons or human individuals. So some people are arguing, kung meron pang chance na mag-split yun or mag-unite or whatever, then you cannot call it a human person. Now, what's the period between fertilization and implantation? Roughly 2 weeks. Roughly 2 weeks. So it's still very early. And then there are other stages pa, but less people would agree with it. But some people will say, well, you can't really call this the implanted embryo as a person kung wala pang brain, kasi consciousness is so important to us. How can you call yourself a human person if you can't think? But when does the brain actually exist? As you can imagine, you trace it down to what, one cell or a nerve cell or whatever. So, ang unang brain stem ba, RD? Brain stem ba yung una? Yeah. So, again. So, it's very hard to pinpoint. So, usually, ang pinag-aawayan dun sa implantation. Now, some will argue na before implantation, pag pigilin mo yung pagtubo, then that's not abortion kasi hindi pa siya human person. But the church recognizes, and with reason, if you look at the entire spectrum, it's a spectrum. Di ba? Unti-unti eh. So it's very hard unti-unti yung pagtubo, yung pag-mature into actual baby. So it's very hard to pinpoint one exact point na, ito na pala. That's why the church says, you will respect human life. Respect the entire spectrum. That's why the church holds from conception, from fertilization. That's the beginning of human life. And human person, that for all practical purposes. Okay? By the way, maraming sa mga contraceptive pills, ipasok ko na, they do 3 things. They're able to do 3 things. The pills, I'm not talking about condoms, I'm talking about other contraceptive devices. So, the pills do 3 things. 1, they prevent ovulation, meaning they stop the process of the egg getting released. Obviously, if an egg doesn't get released, there cannot be fertilization. That's properly contraceptive. Second, they can thicken, so correct me, they can thicken the mucus in the area of the cervix. So it's the opening leading to the uterus. Now, if you know your biology, the sperm has to travel up through the cervix, that hole, into the uterus, and meet the egg in the uterus or in the fallopian tube. So if you thicken the secretion, the mucus, such that sobrang thick na siya, parang sealed na siya, hindi na makalusot ang sperm. that's also properly contraceptive. Kasi hindi na mag-meet yung sperm and egg. Diba? And contraception means you prevent conception. So you prevent the beginning of life. But there's a third function that they do. They included panigurado, and also I don't know if they can actually create something that doesn't have that. But the third function is they make the lining, the wall of the uterus very thin. Now, if the lining of the uterus is very thin, doon kasi nag-i-implant yung fertilized egg. If the fertilized egg cannot implant, then it will die. But what happens then? You actually have a life that has begun, a human life, potentially a human person, or two, or more. But you already have a human life that has begun, that is then stopped from continuing. That, because the church considers human life as beginning from conception, that is not contraception anymore, that's abortion. So many pills do those things. You don't know which one actually operates when you take the pill. Kasi all three are possible. So you don't know what actually transpires. So the possibility of abortion.
Any follow-up question? Doc, you want to say, you want to affirm? Want to add? Okay, man. Spoken like that. So, okay, sayang we don't have much time. Yung mga tanong pa dito, but let's assure you, at least I have an idea. We can, like for example, purpose of life, so we can have a talk about vocation, ganyan, all that. Say we're pressed for that. So, and maybe if you still have questions in mind, just write them, just give them to any ICTUS or Delaney or is information for us so that the next catechism can be concentrated on that topic. We thank Father Peter. It's an exhaustive thing to do.